Hey, what's up, Free Thinklings? Welcome to another episode of Free Think or Die, hosted by Freethinking Ministries. Hey, if you strive to avoid the groupthink of mob mentality, well, you've come to the right place. I'm Dr. Tim Stratton, and today we're going to be discussing a new argument that points to the existence of God. But first, before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and smash that like button and make sure to ring that bell. You have no idea how much we appreciate those little things. It actually helps us out quite a bit. But hey, I got to be honest. My guest today is really one of my favorite people on the planet. He's become a close friend over the past few years, and I'm honored to kind of be that guy that I guess discovered him. At least that's what he says. This is because this guy's ministry and platform seem to be growing bigger every day. And guess what? He kind of got to start with Freethinking Ministries. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please give it up for the one, the only Adam Coleman. There he is. What's up, Adam?
Hey, what's going on, man? What's happening? What you doing? Good, man. Thanks for that introduction, bro. I don't think I'm worthy of it, but I appreciate it. Actually, unfortunately, I'm not the only Adam Coleman. Actually, when I started Googling my name and stuff and developing my platform, I discovered there's apparently a rugby player. I think it's a guy named Adam Coleman. So I'm the second Adam Coleman.
Well, who's older? Who's between the two of you? Is he older?
Actually, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah. I don't know. I got to look it up. Yeah, I mean, he's certainly more famous, apparently. So I think he's got me beat on that one.
Well, yeah. There's another Tim Stratton. He was a football player for Purdue.
Oh, really?
And I think he played in the NFL for a little while. But he's younger than me, and I don't think he's in the NFL anymore. So I think I still get to be the first. Yeah. Right, he kind of got. He was in the public eye maybe. Before I was. So in that sense, he's got me beat. But, I don't know. He's not Dr. Tim Stratton, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Actually, I think this might be my first time on your channel. You're able to introduce yourself as doctor, man. So that's pretty dope. That's what's up.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation going around today about if when you're worthy to call yourself a doctor. I don't know if you're following all of that. People were mad that
I mean, I saw something on Twitter about it. Honestly, I don't know what it's all about, but I did see something briefly on Twitter.
People were saying that Joe Biden's wife shouldn't refer to herself as a doctor because she's got a doctorate of education. And I say, well, why not?
A doctor,
she deserves to be called doctor. Now, I'll just make it clear when I'm introduced as Dr. Tim Stratton, I'm like, yeah, I am a doctor. I've got a PhD, but let me be clear. I cannot help you if you're sick. I'm not that kind of doctor. I'm not a useful doctor.
Right. You're not going to be delivering any babies or anything like that.
That's right. Yeah. If I'm on an airplane and somebody's having a heart attack and so somebody says, hey, is there a doctor on the plane? I'm keeping my hands down. I'm not going to raise my hand.
Right.
All right.
That's cool though, man. Yeah. Well, congratulations to you again, man. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I think you'll be pursuing your doctorate here pretty soon. I hope.
Yeah, actually, as a matter of fact, in terms of the subject we're going to be talking about today, I hope that it kind of works out to where I can, write on this right here. So this show is like the canary in the mining cave or whatever. I'm going to kind of float it out there, and maybe it'll get eviscerated. I have to pick another topic, or it'll do well, and it'll be worth me spending the next 5 years writing on. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, let's see what happens here. But hey, before we get to that. I just got to tell a quick story. You and I, we work with the organization called Maven a little bit. Got the Maven hoodie on right now.
Oh, I should have worn mine, man. I got one. I got mine as well. Yeah.
If anybody knows Brett Kunkel, they've got Maven gear.
Right. Exactly. The Maven merchant. Yeah.
But anyway, you and I were on a Maven trip together in Washington, D.C. A couple summers ago now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I got to tell you, man, you and I were playing some basketball together, and you had the video camera out, and I was like, all right, I'm going to try to channel my inner Stephen Curry. And I took a deep three, like a Stephen Curry three. I shot the ball. I turned around before I even saw what was going to happen and looked into the into the camera and started to do a little dance, and it went into the basket. And I was like, dude, I mean, I was like, did I make it? And you're like, yeah, dude, you made it. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, dude, I can't wait for you to publish, to get this on social media. It's going to blow up.
Right.
And time goes on. I'm like, dude, where's it at? And you're like, I recorded over. I'm like, no.
I deleted it by accident, man. There's no video. It didn't happen. No, I can confirm, man. I'm a primary source for you that it actually did happen. You sunk the three, you turned around, did the dance and everything, man. You were Steph Curry for about 30 seconds, man. I was there. I saw it. Oh man, I know I'm not gonna live that one down, man. That's terrible, man. That's terrible.
Well, I just wanted to get it on record that it actually happened, even though nobody's gonna.
It is on record. It actually happened, man. Absolutely.
So I mean, this gets this is kind of like the resurrection of Jesus. I mean, do you count as
my reliable witness? Right. Well, and I can tell you, I'm not going to die for it. I'm not going to die at about you making that three. I'm certainly not going to do that. But I can say that I'm what's that book by, I think it's Richard Barker, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. So it's Tim and the Eyewitnesses, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. Oh man, that's good, bro.
Yeah. All right. Well, next time we get together, we're going to try to recreate that. See if
there we go, man.
All right. Well, enough fun, I guess. Well,
hopefully not.
Right. A different kind of fun. Different kind of fun.
Right.
All right. Well, I guess let's kind of ease our way into the first thing. It has been a while since you've been on the show. I mean, I went off and got my doctorate and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
At least became official. But yeah, what have you been doing since the last time you were on the Freethinking Ministries YouTube channel? What's been going on in your life?
Well, a bunch actually, a whole lot. So last time, or since the last time that we spoke, I finally got my papers to where I'm now officially a nonprofit organization, or not but Tru-ID Apologetics Ministries is officially a nonprofit organization, and so that was huge right there, man. We're really going to be turning the corner in 2021 with just some new ventures in terms of the kinds of content that we put out. So I'm working on some courses right now. I'm working on doing some webinars right now where people can join in via Zoom or WebEx and what have you, and we're just going to start having some classes. Just going through some stuff with apologetics, and so I'm kind of writing my own curriculum to kind of facilitate that. And even now, we actually, at our Patreon channel, we've got a book club where we comb through some stuff. As a matter of fact, shout out to my man Benjamin Handelman. He's in the chat right now, and he tunes in with our, or he joins in with the Patreon book club. So we've been doing that, and yeah, man. And actually, coming up next April, April 2021. I contributed to a book, as a matter of fact. I contributed to a book that's going to be coming out, and I know I sent you the chapter. You checked it out, but it's finally coming down the pike. As a matter of fact, the pastor just sent me the cover about an hour or so ago, so I got a chance to take a look at that. And so April 2021, I will officially be an author, I guess, a published author. I mean, at least with my chapter, anyway. I won't have a book out there. But
can you tell us the name of the book?
Yeah, so it's actually just called. Actually, wait a minute. Let me not mess it up. I know it's urban. I'm about to mess it up completely. Hold up. Let me bring it up here. Oh man. Okay, so Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel, and it's edited by Eric Mason. And so the idea, as you know, I've been talking about it on Tru-ID. On Freethinking Ministry, with my blogs and things like that. There are a number of various groups who are have anti-Christian bent, to them, that are particular in the African American context. You tend to find them flourishing, in particular, in arguments that they bring to the table as well. And so what we're doing is we're addressing those arguments, just head on, man. Everything from, is Christianity antithetical to being, of African descent? Is Christianity the white man's religion, would be one way to put it. And there's various different groups that we're engaging, whether it be the Hebrew Israelites, Comedics, and the Moors, Muslims, and so forth, who are all have a say on what it is that the African American community should be pursuing from a spiritual standpoint. So we're, bringing the gospel, man, and bringing answers, rational answers to the table. and give it everything we got to engage these groups and objections, man. So that's what what the book is about in a nutshell.
Yeah. Awesome. Tell me about, I mean, you're so focused on, I mean, the name of your ministry, your organization is called Tru-ID. Just tell me what's behind the name.
Yeah. So Tru-ID is an acronym. It stands for the real you Imago Dei. And actually, this is going to get into some of the stuff we'll talk about here in a minute. But a couple of years ago, as I was just getting into apologetics, I realized that there were a number of objections to Christianity that all seem to revolve around identity within the African American context. And so you had these various different groups, like some of the ones that I named, who would key in on this notion of African enslaved persons being taken from the continent, ripped away from their culture, their identity, and so forth. And it's like these different groups wanted to fill that identity gap. Say, okay, well, our ethnic heritage is this, and so this is what we need to be, appealing to, and so on. And so, they were even taking it as far as to say, well, we need to get rid of Christianity. Christianity is the white man's religion. And so based upon who we are, what we need to do is make sure that we're getting back to African spiritualism and things of that nature. And so what I realized is that most of these groups, what they would do is they would take, the identity claim and kind of fix that to what their prescription is for what African-American people or people of African descent should be doing from a spiritual standpoint. And I said, well, we need to get back to our true ID. What's the foundation of our identity? The foundation of our identity, before there was races was a concept, before nations was a concept, or anything like that, we were people made in the image of God, and still are, obviously.
Yeah.
That is the foundation of who we are. And I said, it's really, if that's not your starting point in terms of your identity foundation, then you will inevitably go off course one way or the other. And so that's how I decided to call it Tru-ID. Who's the real you? And what follows from that if we're developing our identity according to who God says that we are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Absolutely love it. You and I, how long ago was it? How many years ago was it that you and I first crossed paths on social media, on Facebook? But it was several years ago now. But
yeah, it might have been, I guess, with 3 or 4, maybe.
I think it was. I'd say it was either 2015 or early 2016. But
has it been like, that's wild. Maybe it has, man. You're right, because I started the Tru-ID podcast. I guess it would have been about 4 or 5 years ago. So that's right. Yeah, because I think it was Eric Hernandez. I met him some kind of way on Facebook, and then he put me on to you, and then we linked up, and kind of the rest is history, I guess. But I guess it has been that long. That's wild, man.
Well, yeah, we became fast friends because we kind of realized that we really had a lot of the same passions, and we're kind of thinking about the same kinds of things, and we saw how they were related. And I think we're going to see that kind of reveal itself as we go on today in our conversation. I'm
getting old, man. I'm saying 2 or 3 years, but look, Lord knows, like I didn't turn 40 this year, so I don't know if my memory is slipping or what.
Welcome to my decade.
Yeah, right.
I've been there for a while. Hey, just really quickly, Benjamin Handelman, he says everybody should buy Tru-ID apologetics gear and join the Tru-ID Apologetics Patreon. Amen to that. I'm going to agree.
Hey, that'd be great. I'm wearing one of the shirts. I don't know if they can see it, but I am wearing.
There you go.
Tru-ID right now. You know what I'm saying? Tru-ID Apologetics. We got a couple different shirts and whatnot. So hey,
I gotta get one of those. I don't have one of those yet. I gotta get.
Oh, see, man, you're behind the fashion trend, man. It's all the rage right now.
Because I'm old. All right. Well, let's get to this next question. So you're telling us about, you've got this argument that you're kind of working on. You want to see if it's gonna work. You're thinking about doing some maybe even a dissertation on something related to this argument. So I think you were originally calling this the argument from identity, right. But now. Tell me if I'm wrong. I think you're referring to it as the SCAAN, right? The self-concept argument against naturalism, the SCAAN. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Now, when I was looking at it, seems like it might be related to the argument from reason, or even
Oh, yeah.
something that I know a little bit about called the free thinking argument.
Good.
So tell us a little bit about the SCAAN. How did you get interested in this, and where did it come from?
Yeah, definitely, man. So, like I said, a couple years ago, well, I keep saying a couple, but it's been probably more than a couple now, but more like 6 years ago, as I was, I'd already gotten into apologetics, and I started noticing there was these various objections to Christianity from these groups and individuals who believed that they needed to reclaim their Africanness or ethnic heritage and cast off, that which was European, and they considered Christianity to be on the European side of the ledger, and so supposedly we need to get rid of it. And so, like I said a second ago, it just seemed like so much of this stuff revolved around identity. And it's like I say that I think that well, actually, I don't think this is original to me, but I think that the philosophy of a group or people really flows out of the questions that they ask. You know what I'm saying, like, what are the questions that they're wrestling with? And so for me, I wanted to, kind of tangle with this whole identity thing from various different vantage points. And so I started just looking at, like, what is it, what does it look like to, quote, lose one's identity? Like, what are people saying about that? And then that led me to, dig deeper in terms of, well, wait a minute. Well, what is identity? What is it that people are saying that we have lost, and that sort of a thing? And so now, granted, I'm a hip hop head from the 80s and 90s, so, coming up, you would always hear, whether it be a KRS-One or some of the so-called conscious guys, this notion of knowledge of self. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, knowing yourself, knowing who you are and where you come from. Essentially, that was like a really big thing, particularly in your late 80s, early 90s, and so forth. Kind of throughout what people I'm saying to be conscious hip hop. So that theme has always been kind of present in my life. This notion of like knowledge of self. You got to know who you are and where you come from. And I started kind of just, tinkering with that a little bit and associating it with what people are saying now about reclaiming this Africanness, digging into, well, what is identity? And I came to the conclusion that I think that not all worldviews can give an account of identity, that a satisfactory account of identity, I should say. I say all the time that not all worldviews aren't created equal. Mm-hmm. And, when you think about if a worldview is like the lens through which you see the world, like kind of your big picture, your puzzle, and you got like these different puzzle pieces, like whether it be, your concept of spirituality or, anthropology, what is man and those kinds of things. You got an identity puzzle piece in there somewhere. Yeah. And what I came to realize that for some worldviews, that identity puzzle piece just doesn't fit. I'm saying, it can't sustain identity, particularly the worldview that pertains to naturalism. This idea that the world is or reality is reduced down to its physical constituents, if you will, and the laws of nature and processes thereof, and all that kind of stuff. I came to think that naturalism, I believe, can't sustain a robust sense of identity. We'll kind of get into that. But one thing that really kind of brought it around actually is a combination. I was thinking about the free thinking argument, and just, you're associating it with our ability to have knowledge, right? Yeah. Knowledge of the world. And then I kind of linked that with this notion of knowledge to self. And there was an article that I wrote. It's definitely been over a year now, but where I incorporated a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King that I felt kind of touched on a little bit. So if you don't mind, I'll share my screen so I can share that quote. Yeah, and we'll get at it that way. All right. Let me open this up. Okay, there we go. So I came across this quote and I thought it was pretty fascinating. Now, one of my pet projects is digging into African-American thinkers and African philosophers who aren't well known, and kind of just, reviving their works or giving it like a philosophical makeover. So I try to draw philosophical insights out and just develop them a little bit and employ them as I'm doing apologetics. So, this one here, this quote here, this is from his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech in 1964. He says, "I refuse to accept the idea that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in the river of life, unable to influence the unfolding events which surround him. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality." Mm. And so I came across this quote, and I thought it was fascinating, because if materialism is true, or I'll kind of get into how I'm defining naturalism. I'll just say if naturalism is true, then it seems to me that I think physical determinism follows from it, right?
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then it would be true that we are flotsam and jetsam in the river of life, right? Now, obviously, Dr. King is saying that we're more than that, right? But if materialism is true, then no, we're not actually. We're just flotsam and jetsam, and we shouldn't presume that we're able to influence the unfolding events which surround us. And so I thought it was fascinating that this conception of who we are and what our capacities are, given that he rejects like what would be necessitated by a naturalistic worldview, it was kind of part of the underpinning of his view on the civil rights movement. I'm saying, like, he believed that we really had the ability to impact the events around us. Like, we have agency, we have freedom of the will by which we can affect change. Now, if you take that out of the equation, what would that do for the rest of Dr. King's perspective and activities toward the liberation of people at that time? So I'm kind of just taking all these things into account, and I decided to apply this to what I've been considering with the that concept of knowledge of self. And as I was thinking about it, I said, you know what? Actually, if materialism is true, then I think there's a lot of things that fall out of the picture that allow for us to sustain our identity concept. And so I guess we can get into that in a second, but I want to just maybe pause here and see, kind of what your thoughts were. What do you think about that?
Well, I love this quote, and I think you're exactly right. If, he seems to be saying that, oh, man.
Oh, should I bring it back? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to read that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's all right.
Sorry about that.
Excuse me. There we go. Yeah, he seems to be saying, I refuse to accept the idea that man does not possess the libertarian freedom,
Exactly.
to have influence on others and on our state of affairs. I mean, he seems to be saying that he refuses to accept the idea that we're just passive cogs along for the ride, that we make choices, and I've been having some conversations with others today, saying, well, you can still make choices even if you don't have libertarian freedom. And I'm like, look, if something or someone other than you causally determines how you choose, then you are not responsible for your choice if it's even worthy of the name choice. Right. But I like this because he's saying, no, we are responsible. We have responsibility. And obviously that's a huge concept to think about when we think about racism and how we ought to see our fellow man and things like that. So,
absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, and this is what I like about as far as in the realm of apologetics, what I like about the moral argument for God's existence, the arguments from reason, the free thinking argument, is that they have real world applicability, right? It's not just kind of these abstract, ideas, but no, they actually do factor into how we live our lives. I mean, think of just the gravity of what you just said. I mean, like if we don't have the capacity for free will, in the libertarian sense, then anybody who was fighting for, the liberation of African Americans at that time, they were just kind of robotically, there's nothing praiseworthy about that. They were just doing what they were determined to do.
Right.
And then on the flip side, if, whoever, whatever racists they were contending against at that time, they're not really, blameworthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were just doing what they were programmed to do. It's just, you really suck out the moral dimension of, things that I think naturally recognize to be morally significant, right?
Mm-hmm.
That whole movement was morally significant, but you take out the meaning of it if you subtract freedom of the will corresponding with moral action.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how he says this. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war. I mean, you could easily just replace that. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the forces of physics and chemistry.
You could, that's true. Yeah,
I mean, if that's right. That seems to be what follows if naturalism is true. Now, some would say, well, that, quantum mechanics is indeterministic. Like, okay, well, still everything about humanity still mankind would be tragically bound to the forces of naturalistic forces if they're deterministic or indeterministic. And
if you've got indeterminacy at the quantum level, I mean, you still got a long way to go to get to libertarian free will at the macro level. I mean, that's you got some miles to walk there. You can't just say, quantum mechanics are the gaps and then call it a day. You still got quite a bit to explain there. Right.
Well, yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, if quantum mechanics, if the forces of, physics and chemistry and quantum physics, including quantum physics, determines everything about humanity, then still everything about humanity is determined by something or by something other than humanity. And so you got the same problems.
Right. And it should be noted too that, I mean, we don't know really if at the quantum level things are determined or not. I mean, we can say that there are interpretations of quantum mechanics that that can function or that work, if you will, on an indeterminate model. But then there are also interpretations of quantum mechanics that are fully determined. That's exactly right, between the two, we don't know which one. I mean, they're equal in terms of their ability to explain what we're seeing at the quantum level. So, if anything, you can't just say, oh, well, things are indeterminate at the quantum level. I mean, they may be, but we don't know.
Yeah. And if they are, still everything about humanity, at least we still don't gain responsibility. If quantum mechanics determines things about me, then I'm not responsible for those things. Quantum mechanics is.
Sure.
It seems to me.
Because at the end of the day, you're the thought processes and actions, everything about you is still attributable to antecedent events. You know what I'm saying? Before you thought to do this or before you acted to do that, there are forces in play that dictated, what it was that you would think, do, or what have you.
Right. And so I think, obviously racism gets us into moral responsibility. But it's first, I think, vital to talk about the ability to take thoughts captive before they take us captive. I mean, let's think about what the Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians 10:5. He says, we destroy every argument raised against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to obey Christ. So he's thinking about thinking right here. But in Colossians 2:8, Paul tells us that we can be taken captive by bad thinking. And so here we have a range of alternative thought options that Paul is providing for us here. We can choose to take our thoughts captive, or we can let our thoughts take us captive. And so that requires, I contend, the libertarian freedom to think. And when we are not taking our thought, you want to know where racism came from? From people failing to take all their thoughts captive to obey Christ.
Facts.
Right?
Facts. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
at the end of the day,
everybody.
Right.
Yeah. At the end of the day, if every human was taking every thought captive to obey Christ, racism would be obliterated.
I just did a teaching on that a couple of weeks ago. As a matter of fact, shout out to Ratio Christie WMU. I did a teaching on their channel on this very thing, and the title of it was "What Has Athens to Do with Jerusalem?" And it was just really predicated on this notion that these unbiblical concepts of man and where we stand in relation to one another, we just imbibed them, in the church, and just kind of we took a look at how destructive that's been, but certainly had folks back in as his idea was kind of crystallizing and coming about, had they taken their thoughts captive and subjected it to the obedience of Christ, then we wouldn't be where we are today. That's for sure, and where we have been, in times past. Absolutely.
Yeah, so Ben Kissling here jumped in the comments, and he said, I think it, referring to racism, was around a bit earlier than Christ's incarnation. Well, sure. Then I would say then we failed to take our thoughts captive to obey the moral law in our hearts that God has written upon.
Because Jesus, and we don't have to go too far afield here, but I mean, the reality is the moral teachings that Jesus, exemplified in his life and ministry flow directly from the nature of God. That's the foundation of all morality, number one. But it's echoed all throughout the Old Covenant. So when we think about things like, justice, mercy, what he refers to as the weightier matters of the law, all those things are contained in the Old Testament text. And so, yeah.
So let's look at a couple other comments here. My friend Phil Bear, he says there's a great potential equivocation between quantum indeterminacy and philosophical indeterminacy. I guess I want him to clarify that a little bit. But then he said, I joined late. Do we have a working definition of racism to base the discussions on? How would you define racism?
Well, I mean, I don't think it'll really pertain to the argument that I'm about to put on the screen, but so I guess he may be thinking that this whole conversation is about racism, but actually it's really not. It's about the identity argument. Right. But I mean, if we just wanted to go there, I mean, I think actually I would refer you to my YouTube page because I have a whole video on it. I think at bottom, racism, I like to define it first in theological terms. I think it's being unloving towards your neighbor on the basis of race. And I think that's you're breaking you're breaking both of Jesus's great commandments. I think that's what it comes down to, and I think it cashes out on an individual level. But sin, by its nature, isn't necessarily individual. It can manifest itself collectively as well, and in so much as it does and can be instantiated in a society, you can have systemic expressions of it also. But it ultimately is going to be rooted, I think, in just having been unloving towards one's neighbor on the basis of race. But I got a whole talk on it. As a matter of fact, the one I just mentioned at WMU, I talked about how I think actually the term racism at this present moment, I think kind of fails to really capture the range of expressions of what we refer to as racism. And I define that in my further in my talk with Rachel Christie. So maybe I can just put the link to it in the chat. And it might save some time. But regardless of what it is, it won't factor into the argument that I'm presenting today.
Cool. Well, let's get back to the argument. In fact, why don't you sketch this argument out for us? Give us the premises and the conclusion, and then maybe tell us why you think the premises are true.
Yeah, so the basis of it is I'll try to comb through some key definitions here in a second, but the idea is that I'll kind of define self-concept, and I'm saying that our self-concept, right? Now let me actually define that. So as a matter of fact, I've got it on my slides. I don't know why I'm doing all this hard work. I actually have it on my slides. let me bring my slides back up. Instead of try to conjure it up up a memory here. So let me make it easier myself. All right. So, actually, let's backtrack for a second. So, when we're talking about the self, I'm going to ask the audience, and I'm going to ask you, Tim, maybe to kind of, just ask yourself the question, like, who are you? Right. Matter of fact, Tim, let's try a little exercise, right? If you have, if you get to maybe just think of like 5 words to describe some things about you, when you think about who are you, what are some things about you that you can describe? Just give like 5 words.
Okay, you want 5 words describing me?
Yeah, a list of 5. When you think about yourself, what are some things that are true about Tim Stratton in terms of who he is?
Well, I mean, I'm probably cheating a little bit here, but I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is I'm in the image of God.
Right. Okay.
A soul in the image of God. I know that's the first thing I'm going to do when I say, well, who am I, is to define what am I, what I am.
Interesting. Okay.
So I believe I'm an immaterial soul created in the image of God who can survive the death of my body and who will. But then there's other things about me that, based on the law of identity that make me different from other people. I'm the husband of my wife, Tia, and the father of my son, Ethan. So although you and I are the same, we're both immaterial souls created in the image of God. That's what makes us equal. That's what makes us brothers.
Right.
Obviously, there's differences that we have as well, and that I guess. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I'm speaking off the top of my head.
No, that's cool.
Right?
That's cool. I made the mistake of asking a philosopher, man. You gave me this really rigorous and accurate answer. I was most people, but I mean, you keyed in on some things. I mean, you talked about being made in the image of God. You're an image bearer, right? You're also a husband, to a specific woman. You're specifically to Tia, right? You're also an apologist, American. There's various different things that we can say that we are. And so what I'm saying is that all of the sum total of the meanings that we ascribe to ourselves, that's our self-concept. That's what we mean by self-concept. Okay. So that's where I'm going with it there. Now, what I'm saying is that when you think about a materialist view of the world, at the end of the day, you're going to start with its physical constituents. You're talking about matter and energy, atoms or waves or whatever it may be. That's what you're going to have at bottom, right? And from that, the naturalists want to say something like, evolution is the best account of how we got to be, who we are. And it's through evolution that we have developed these rational, developed consciousness and rational faculties and so on and so forth, right? Now, panpsychists might want to put, rationality somewhere before then. They may want to say that there's a proto-consciousness at the matter and energy level. Maybe we can come back to that later. But, for most folks, they're going to say to some extent or another, evolution has played a role, in bringing about our ability to have consciousness, right? And so, our conscious life is predicated on our biology. Our biology is predicated on matter. And all those things, brought together, that's what has given us the ability to, discern truth and know things about the world. Okay, knowledge. And so when it comes to knowledge of self, things that we know about ourselves, that too is predicated upon our consciousness, which is predicated upon biology, which is predicated upon the physical constituents of the world, right? Matter, energy, and so forth. Well, what I'm saying is on a materialist view, it doesn't have the resources given, what you have at your disposal as a materialist. You don't have the resources within the worldview to account for this higher order knowledge of self. And so that's kind of what I want to sketch out here in a second. Does that make sense so far? Or
yeah, I'm tracking with you.
Cool. All right. So here's the argument. I haven't said all that. All right. The self-concept argument against naturalism, SCAAN. Yeah, now you're right. Before I just called it the argument from identity, but I felt SCAAN sounded cooler, man. I don't know.
SCAAN does sound cool. Yeah,
it sounds kind of cool, right? It's I'm kind of biting off of Alvin Plantinga. He's got the EAAN, I think is what it is. So I'm kind of biting off that a little bit. So I've got SCAAN, the self-concept argument against naturalism.
Well, see, that's what I'm talking about because I stole from him to make the FAAN, the FAAN, the Freethinking.
There we go. Great minds, man. There you go.
Yeah. So, Plantinga started the whole thing, the argument against naturalism. So let's just come up with all these kinds of things to put for AAN. And
AAN, right. Great minds steal from Alvin Plantinga. That's
right.
Right. So premise one, if naturalism is true, the self-concept cannot be rationally maintained. That's premise one. Premise two, the self-concept can be rationally maintained. And then that leads us to our conclusion. Therefore, naturalism is false. So it's modus tollens here. And so let me just go through real briefly through a couple of different definitions so that we can all be in proximity of where I'm getting at here. So when I'm talking about naturalism, just real quickly, and now I know there's a bunch of different disagreement on what naturalism is, and people are going to take exception to how I'm framing it here. That's, but philosophers do that all day long. So anyway, I think, most philosophers will take it to be uncontroversial if I describe it broadly as kind of the causal closure of the physical world, of the universe, if you will. That would be one tenet. The notion that the building blocks of physics account for everything that exists. Some would say they might add information in there. We can come back to that. And then you could, the notion that these building blocks, these physical building blocks, lack a first person quality to them. It's just they are what they are. And so, again, I mentioned self-concept earlier as the sum total of the meanings by which we understand ourselves, understand others, and interact with the world. So your self-concept is your big picture of you. I'm saying if you take all these pieces together and put them together, that's you. All right, rationally, I use that word in the argument. And what I mean by rationally is both reason and reasoning, right? So when I'm thinking about reason, I'm talking about, just the laws of logic, and things of that nature. That's those things that exist outside the person. Truth itself, objective truth existing outside the person. So I'm talking about reason there, and truth being the object of it. And then reasoning, I'm talking about those internal processes. I'm talking about the mental states and processes by which we arrive at things that are true. That's what I'm talking about there. So rationally, I'm packaging in reason and reasoning. And when I talk about maintenance in the argument, I'm talking about developing and adapting the self-concept such that it approximates or corresponds to the world as it actually is, right? Now, actually, in the earlier versions that I sent you of this argument, I kind of just focused on basically kind of the knowledge of like kind of how do you affirm who you are. But as I dug deeper in terms of how our self-concepts function, I realized that there's a stronger argument that can be made. And I think it'll kind of make some sense here in a second. So I'll just kind of breeze through this.
Yeah.
Real quickly, just kind of define where we're going. When I'm thinking about just I talked about rationality and some of the building blocks that I'm talking about as far as rationality is concerned, and actually I'll take it more broadly, the conscious life. We're talking about qualia, being one of them. That first person quality of sensations. I mean, there's a difference between what we call redness and my experience of perceiving redness. Like my experience of perceiving redness. That's what we're talking about when we say qualia. Intentionality, this notion of aboutness. The fact that our thoughts have this representative feature. Meaning they can represent things in the actual world. When I say say something about a tree, there's some ontology to that notion of a tree. I mean, trees actually exist and it refers to something specific. Mental causation, real quick, is just the idea of thoughts causing other thoughts in virtue of the propositional content. So it's just the idea that if I say all men are mortal. Premise 1, premise 2, Socrates is a man, and then premise 3, Socrates is immortal. You can come to the conclusion because your thoughts are able to kind of cause other thoughts, and you can follow that chain of reasoning and arrive at somewhere, and on the basis of the content of those propositions. And then free will. I mean, this is your wheelhouse, man. Just the notion of I tried to do it right here. I think it's the ability to choose between options in accordance with one's nature. I think that's how you frame it, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty close. In fact, that would work. I sometimes will expand it a bit and say the ability to choose between or among an alternative range of options, each of which is compatible with one's nature at a given moment.
Oh, okay. let's go with that. We'll take mine as being like the McDonald's version, and then you just gave us the Ruth Chris version of a rendering of free will there. But
now I will also say. So you're going with libertarian free will here, just simply libertarian freedom.
Sure, yeah.
And I'll also note that oftentimes I'll just say, hey, look, it's when you are not causally determined. When your thoughts or thoughts, actions, beliefs, or behaviors, whatever, if ever they are not causally determined by something or someone other than you, then you possess libertarian freedom. And then I like to go further. At least when I can, and argue for this definition that you're providing for us here. But a big thing here is simply that I'll just add this is on naturalism. It seems that all of your thought, every human's thought, would always be causally determined by physics and chemistry, quantum mechanics, the forces and past events of nature, or something other than you. And if that's the case, then I think, as you're going to know, we've got some rationality problems going on.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's very key here, because I talked about self-concept, and when in the realms of psychology and sociology, we're talking about the self. The self is understood to have agency. It's not just like a blank slate that's kind of being influenced or imposed upon by circumstances, social situations. In the social sciences, you have this notion of the self that it's active. It's able to not only receive or kind of be influenced by the outside world, but also we have the capacity to influence our circumstances and social structures and social situations, things of that nature. And so that's very key in terms of where we're going anyway.
Yeah, I like how you said that there's this agency, we're active agents, as opposed to what John DePoe said, as opposed to a passive cog in the machine, right? You're more than a mere passive cog at the mercy of the whims of something or someone other than us. No, you are an active agent, at least at times, and have the ability to act one way or another, or to take a thought captive or not. Things like that. So,
yeah, and think really, it's that's what we're dealing with. Again, with the self as you're coming in. Imagine if you're coming into a social situation or whatever. It's not the case that you're just kind of like I said, like a blank slate to be written upon by that situation. Like, no, we bring something to the table, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we can be influenced, but we're also influencers. I think that's really key. And like I said, in dealing with psychology, sociology, those are just kind of fundamental principles with the or foundational notions rather, as we kind of move forward to explore some of the theories that we will. So,
and if you don't mind, I'll just jump in really quick. I mean, just think about. You talked about how some thoughts can kind of cause other thoughts. What I find really interesting is, are we the kinds of things that can judge each thought as good or bad, true or false, better, the best, worst, or worse or the worst? I like. Can you judge? Do you have access to this range of possible judgment options, or I like to call them evaluative judgment options, or EJO, an EJO. We'll call it an EJO, an evaluative judgment option. Are you the kind of ability that at minimum can judge between to judge an idea, a statement, a proposition, an argument as good or bad at minimum? Now look at that. There's a range of options, good or bad. Now, if something or someone other than you causally determines you to not have access to one of those judgment options, then do you stand in a position to know if you should have judged it otherwise? So this is really where we get into the importance of libertarian freedom when it comes.
Oh no, I mean, yeah, you're getting you're going exactly where I want to go with the conversation, man.
Oh, so, right. Yeah. Well, I'll just give it to you then.
No, cool. Yeah, so this is where we start to get a little spicy here, in terms of the meat of where we're going. I get excited about this stuff, quite frankly, because it's kind of like with you with the free thinking argument. It really captures the heart of what your ministry is about. Like for me, that's kind of what this argument is. Like I've kind of taken the central idea of Tru-ID and I've made something out of it. Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
I gotcha.
I had to switch my microphone.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So let me share again. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Let's see here. 1 second. There you go.
All right, cool. All right. So again, I kind of outline those concepts there. And so, I'm just kind of giving you the argument again and just kind of specifying that rationally, that's the hinge upon which this whole argument really turns. And we'll see why in a second, so it's not so much about can self-concepts be maintained. And again, remember, I mentioned maintained is referencing a coherence between the self and the world, if you will. So we're not just talking about just being maintained, but rationally maintained. That's going to be the key here in a second. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the self-concept. I'm not going to, belabor everybody with all the, as many details as I've bogged myself down with over the last couple of months of, researching this, but I'll try to sketch out what we mean by self-concept and try to make sense of it. So we talked about the self as being like this reflexive agent, that's kind of, there's this give and take relationship between the self and the world and self and others and so forth. It's not a blank slate. It's malleable. It can change, but it's also active. So that's what we're talking about with the self. And we talked about the self-concept being the sum total of all the, the meanings by which we understand ourselves, understand others, and interact with the world. Right now, when it comes to theories of understanding how that self is developed and how it's maintained, there are two main competing theories. You have identity theory and you have social identity theory. Okay. Now, identity theory grows up out of the tradition of the psychologists. I'm saying you're coming from a psychological vantage point. Psychologists are most are concerned with what's going on within the person. That's kind of like their starting point, right? Sociologists, on the other hand, that's where social identity theory kind of flows from. And with sociology, you're dealing not so much with what's going on within the person, but it's about what's going on with the person in light of the social context, right? And so it's two different ways or two different angles from which these theories are trying to evaluate human behavior. That's what they're really trying to get at. So you got the psychology with identity theory, and then sociology is going to bring forth social identity theory. And they have different ways in terms of how we construct our self-concept. Now, with that being said, before we get into how each of them kind of goes about understanding human behavior, there's this shared concept of personal identity. Okay. Now, personal identity is basically, that's the you that you bring into every situation. Okay. regardless of whether you're in a social situation or some of these other circumstances that we'll talk about, it's the you. It's the meanings about yourself that you understand yourself to be that's going to flow into and inform how you understand yourself in social situations or, as an individual. Okay. So each of these theories, they have different ideas of what is the base of identity, or we can maybe use the term source for understandability's sake, but from a psychologist's perspective, they're going to look at identity, or the base of identity, as being one's role. It's the roles that you occupy. So when you talked about, who you are, one of the things that you said is that you're an image bearer, right? Mm-hmm. But you also said that you are a husband. Okay. Now, husband, you actually can kind of look at it both ways, but a husband could be an example of a role that you fulfill. Okay. You have a husband that could be a category or a group, like I'm a husband as well, right? But when it comes to the specific role that you have with your wife, Tia, right, that's something that's specific to you. I'm saying that's a role that you have, right? Another example of a role might be, let's say, an apologist, or something of that nature, or there's various different ways you can construe it. But as a matter of fact, I'm gonna cheat on my own slides and skip ahead for clarity's sake. This kind of help us to speed up. But when you look at some of the middle column here, when we talk about roles, right? In some social situations, I might be a peacemaker, right? I might find myself in social situations where two people are at odds with each other, and I kind of see myself as being inclined as being a peacemaker. Others might disagree, but at least that's what I'm going to say about myself. In other instances, let's say that I'm my kids are at a playground and a wild dog just runs up. You know what I'm saying? Like, my role in that instance is going to be a protector, right? That's going to be my role in that situation. In some instances, I'm a debater. In some instances, I might be an advocate if I'm a social worker by trade, right? So my role when I'm at my job is in large part to be an advocate, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're thinking about role, like the function that you serve in any given situation. Okay. On the other hand, when we're talking about the base of identity or a source of identity, from a social identity standpoint, now we're getting into sociology, it more so has to do with groups that you belong to, or categories that you might find yourself in, right? So this is, it's pretty easy to understand. Like, Tim, you'd be an American. I'm an American. I might consider myself to be an African American. I'm a Christian. There's these categories. There's these groups that we belong to. Yeah. I'm a member of a particular church. That might be, a group I belong to, and so forth, right? So these are one of the, it's kind of your basis of identity. Okay. Now, here's the thing: is that we all have various facets to our identity. We all have various roles that can emerge, and depending on the situation that you're in, depending on who you're around, there are different categories that you might fall into, right? So I remember, when I was a kid, just to be quite frank, I mean, I grew up in the South, man, and race was a real issue in my high school, and so when you go into, I remember you go into the lunchroom, and you had the black kids at one table, you got the white kids at another table, and I was a band nerd. So we were kind of like this weird hodgepodge of misfits, what I mean? And I would be at the band table. We were kind of like this group of outcasts, So if I'm walking into the lunchroom, there's these different facets of my identity, right? But the one that's going to matter to me most at that time is I'm going to relate to the band nerds in that situation. So, given, that we all have these different roles and different groups that we can fit into, both of these theories have this concept that's called salience. Okay. Salience has to do with what is it that identity or that aspect of your identity that is present in that moment. Okay. So let's say, for example, let's go to the issue of role, right? So Tim, you talked about being a husband to Tia. Obviously, that's your role. All right. Now, let's say you're a husband to Tia, and you go to church on Sunday, and there's some other lady there. You wouldn't want to enact the role of husband with somebody that's not your wife, right? It's pretty important that you get that aspect of your identity right. In terms of applying that.
I better get that right.
You better get that right. I'm pretty sure Tia would have a problem if you didn't. You know what I'm saying? There's real implications here in terms of this. The salience really matters, right?
Right.
So the role that you activate, right, in any given particular time influences your behavior and how you relate to others and so forth. All right. So let's give you another example. Matter of fact, I like the fact that you said you talked about being an image bearer. Okay. Now, one of the big problems, this actually goes back to what you said about taking our thoughts captive. One of our big problems today is that we have this concept of race being treated as a foundation of our identity, when really, as I argued before, it should be this notion of being the image bearer. That's the foundation of who you are. Yeah. So let's say if you have a black person and a white person, let's just say they're two Christians, and for whatever reason, they're arguing about some racial issue. Okay. What should happen is the aspect of their identity of being the imago Dei should supersede their identities in terms on a racial standpoint. In other words, it should be the anchor in terms of how they're dealing with one another. It should dictate in terms of how they're dealing with one another more so than these other identities, right? Yep. So so you should activate. This is the notion of activation. You should activate, if you will, that kingdom imago Dei identity over and above these other identities. And the reality is we all have hierarchies, whether it be roles or groups and categories. There's hierarchies within ourselves in terms of what's more preeminent than others. And if you get one wrong, if you get that wrong, you can really, be out of step with how we ought to be interacting with one another. In this case, if it's you're dealing with race, we ought to be activating that imago Dei, and these other things fall beneath that, right? So that's what activation is, in terms of who, what is present at the moment. All right.
Now, would you say that that's something that you have the power and ability to activate or not?
Well, I mean, as a theist, I can say that. That's going to take us, to where we're going. But that's very fascinating. So let's say. So the answer let's take a step back from theism for a second. Now, in terms of just the theories themselves, in talking about psychology, or actually in this instance, we're talking about sociology. Sociologists would say yes, because the self is active. The self is an agent, right? And so you can enter into a social situation, and you have some bearing in terms of what aspect of you is prominent in that situation. Now, you may not necessarily be conscious of it all the time. But let me give you a scenario. So let's say that you grow up in a racist household, and I'm using race because it's a big issue right now, and I think it'll help us to see clearly. Yeah. Let's say that you grow up in a racist household, whatever color you are. For the sake of this illustration, it doesn't really matter. Right. You grow up in a racist household, okay, and still you go to church every Sunday, right? And in terms of what you were taught, you really you don't know any better. Like maybe you're a 10-year-old and you really think like, man, this other group is just less than me, because of their race, right? And you say you grow up that way, and you were taught that all the way up through high school. And then you go to college, and you go to you go into church, and some minister pulls you aside and teaches you about what it means to be made in the image of God. And so now you've got this understanding of, oh, wait a minute, I've now got to update my self-concept, right? I may have been taught these things when I was younger, but now given this information that I have about how I should be oriented in terms of my identity, I'm now going to activate differently when I come into contact with other people. So now instead of, me having some sense of superiority with other racial groups, I'm now going to activate my imago Dei as preeminent in my thinking. And I'm going to understand that person to be equal. Not only am I going to activate the imago Dei in terms of how I see myself, but I'm also going to have that in the forefront of how I see the other person, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this is very key, because in social identity theory, and I should have said this earlier, a key concept is this notion of in groups and out groups. Okay, it's this notion that there's this group that I belong to, and I'm going to conform to the norms, ideas, and so forth of this group, behaviors of this group. And then there's, by implication, there's this other group that is not us. They're in the out group, right? And there could be stereotypes and so forth that we have about the out group, that because my in group believes such and such about this out group, I'm going to conform to that as well, But you can update that self-concept. You can say, you know what, I'm actually going to break away from the stereotypes that my in group, my previous in group, has about this out group. I'm now going to activate the imago Dei, and I'm going to look at that person through the lens of Christ rather than the lens of, what I was taught when I was younger. So that's how you can harness information, right? You can and update your self-concept, and as an agent say, you know what, I'm actually going to activate differently than I did previously. So I didn't mean to go on too long with it, but I guess the short answer was yes, and then I kind of went through.
Well, I just love that idea of activation. It really seems to suggest libertarian freedom, that you have the ability to activate this, that something or someone else does not causally determine this activation. No, you do it, and that's and it
Right.
seems to even imply not just sourcehood, but a leeway ability or a principle of alternative possibilities here, that
Sure.
you can activate this or not, and that, and the people who fail to choose to activate this, being I guess aware of the image of God here, the Imago Dei, then they're responsible. They should have activated it, and they failed to. They weren't, perhaps they weren't careful in their thinking, but they did not choose to take thoughts captive, to obey Christ. That's the ultimate activation, I think.
But just notice all this mental work that's going on, right? As you enter into a social situation, like there's a dynamic relationship between the self and the social situation, right? There's a lot of mental work going on. It's not just, again, we're not just blank slates, but there's some agency here, right? And before I forget, that's social identity theory, but from a psychology perspective, dealing with identity theory, salience is kind of like the equivalent of activation, but just kind of on the psychological side. And it's almost like, again, what role is prominent in any given situation? So let's say like you have a football team and you have a guy that's a punter and he wants to go in and play quarterback. Right. Well, that's not his role. So he didn't have the skill set. His arms probably like, jello or something like that. He didn't have what it takes to be a quarterback. Right. Yeah. But he said, no, I want to be a quarterback. Well, he's not stepping into the role that's appropriate for him given that situation. Right. Now, it's the same thing that we do when it comes to our roles. Like in any given situation we find ourselves, we look at, what role can we play in that situation? What fits with, what we bring to the table, if you will. So if you're a combative person by, in terms of your temperament, you're probably not going to take on the role of a peacemaker, wherever you go. That's probably not going to be what you activate, but you could though, you could take that on.
Yeah.
So we fill different roles. So, were you gonna say something on that or?
No, I'm just thinking along with you. I feel like there's times when I activate my role of the combatant, and there's times when I activate my role as peacemaker. And perhaps sometimes I should activate my role as peacemaker when I instead activate my fight personality.
Probably so.
Yeah. But sometimes it's good to fight. So I don't know.
Sometimes, it depends on the situation, right? Yeah. It's situational, and that's so key actually, I'll come back to that in a second. All right. So lastly, just kind of understanding these concepts, and then once we get through this, I think we'll kind of be going downhill in terms of towards the argument and where we're going. Yeah. So lastly, both of these theories, identity theory and social identity theory, are going to present a picture of why we actualize, why we activate different aspects of our identity, whether it be role or categories. Okay. Now, the psychological side, dealing with identity theory, is there's a lot of debate in terms of why we do these things, but it could be like self-esteem. We step into a certain role because we want to be esteemed a certain way, or we want to feel competent or effective and something like that. Another one I think is fairly recent in the literature is this notion of authenticity. We might take a certain role in a given situation that we believe to be most true to our personal identity. What I have there at the top, right? So there's different ideas of why we actualize or activate different aspects of ourselves, but on the psychological side, it's all about self-verification, something about, what you're gaining out of it. Whereas on the social identity side, it's about depersonalization. It's this notion that we activate certain identities, and in doing so, we take on what we believe to be the prototype of the group that we're trying to, align ourselves with, and we want this cohesion. We want to be able to kind of have this cohesive relationship with this group. That's kind of like, bare bones, the idea behind depersonalization, if you will. Okay. So there's reasons why we activate this identity this role or that role, this group or that group category or what have you in terms of how we identify. Now, okay, I said all that to say, I know we've covered a lot of ground, but I now want to take a look at how do these theories of behavior in terms of who we are and how we function relate to what I talked about earlier in terms of the foundations of reason. And, so again, this is just kind of examples of the different bases of identity. Notice I have on the bottom right there, unfathomably intelligent, remarkably handsome, and humble beyond belief. I thought that was important. I thought those were important personal traits to call out about myself there, But
you're the most humble person. I mean, you never fail to take an opportunity to tell people how humble you are.
So. Oh, absolutely. It would be a disservice to people for me to do that. So yeah, I have to. Right. But actually, I do want to just make a quick note in terms of how personal traits that we assign to ourselves. Notice that sometimes there's a moral dimension to them. You might think I'm a good person. There's a moral dimension to how you evaluate yourself. All right. I just want to throw that out there. Now, and we've kind of touched on some of this a little bit, but when it comes to how these building blocks of reason intersect with these identity theories, and the self-concept, that's where we really start to see something interesting. Okay. Because I can kind of breeze through some of this because we were joking about it earlier, but when we talk about qualia, right? That first person lived experience. Well, the very nature of identity and theory and social identity theory is to observe behavior in terms of who we think that we are, right? Or who a person thinks that they are. But I know who I am. I know who at least I believe myself to be, and I know that from a first person vantage point. I know that I've had certain experiences that have led to me thinking certain things about myself, and I know that without in a way that you can't know it, right? In order for you to know who I am, I had to reveal something about myself, either from in terms of what I've said or how I behave. You have this outside looking in knowledge of me, whereas I have the inside looking out knowledge of me, right? And so there's this qualitative element to the human experience in relation to identity, that gets to this notion. Well, how do you reduce this first person experience of who we are down to just particles, atoms and so forth, right? Another thing is too, when you think about it, let's say that you and I we were talking about basketball earlier, let's say that you and I are play for the LA Lakers, you know what I'm saying? Let's say you're Anthony Davis, I'm LeBron James, and I know what it's like to be a basketball player, but I can't tell you what it's like to be LeBron James. I would have to learn something about that. You would have to learn something about what is it like to be Anthony Davis, right? LeBron James in real life. I mean, both of those guys, they know what it's like to play in the NBA. But LeBron James doesn't know what it's like for Anthony Davis to play in the NBA. And Anthony Davis doesn't know what it's like for LeBron James to play. They have a first-person experience that isn't shared. One would have to communicate that to the other in order for them to understand. Right. So you have this quality of human experience, and that those experiences form who we are and how we know who we are. All right, intentionality. You can just kind of be real quick with this, but in terms of the roles and meanings, right, of how we see ourselves. Number one, the self. If I'm thinking about who I am, I'm thinking about me. There's an aboutness there. I'm the object of my thoughts at that point. Also when it comes to the roles and meanings, the role of being a husband, there's a concept there. What does it mean to be a husband? I have to be thinking about that as I actualize or as I activate that aspect of my identity. I'd have to know something about what it means to be a husband in order to properly activate it, or what it means to be an African American, what it means to be an American. All these things have definitions, and I've got to be thinking about them in order for them to be meaningful in terms of how I act upon them or activate them in my thinking. Also, mental causation. I can be real quick with this. I can look in the mirror and see, my skin tone. I can see that I'm a few shades darker than you, right? But what you can't see, just from looking in the mirror, is the history associated with my skin color and living in America. What does it mean to be a descendant of somebody, or probably be a descendant of an African enslaved person? Things like that. Like that doesn't come just from looking in the mirror. In order for me to understand those things about, the group that I belong to and how that group relates to, Caucasian Americans in America and the history there, all those things have to be learned. And that doesn't come about just by, immediate perception. It's a learning process. And so there's some mental causation there. You know what I'm saying? Building blocks in terms of what I know about myself, they build upon one another. I'll put it that way. Okay. So also, let me just give a quick example. So if I'm an African American, then I can have knowledge that I probably derive from African enslaved persons. I don't get that from directly perceiving it in the mirror. I get that because, I can make the connection between this history and that here. I can put them together. There's some mental causation involved there. I want to kind of clarify what I meant there. And then free will, we come back to free will, and I kind of we talked about it a little bit earlier. So, but there's some free will in terms of what aspect of yourself you activate in any given situation. So, we kind of talked about how that there's intersection between free will and who we are, right? Now, okay, I know I've said a mouthful. So now, with that being said, what happens, if you take qualia, intentionality, mental causation, and free will out of the picture, right? If you have a worldview that can't account for those things, what are you left with, right? I put it this way. Okay, the self-concept is, if you will, the pillars, if you will, of the self-concept, rather, the pillars of the self-concept are qualia, intentionality, mental causation, and free will. And I can name other things as well. Yeah. But if those pillars are ripped away, then the self-concept falls apart.
Wow.
And this is really the essence of where we're going with the argument. I'm saying that because naturalism can't account for qualia, intentionality, mental causation, and free will, then it doesn't have the necessary resources to account for our self-concept. So, when you think about, again, qualia, actually I've got a quote from John Searle here from his work. He says, we don't have anything like a clear idea of how brain processes, which are publicly observable, objective phenomenon, could cause anything as peculiar as inner qualitative states of awareness or sentience, states which are in some sense private to the possessor of the state. All right. So again, it's that issue of like, how do you get this first person experience from things that we know by third person interaction, so forth. So intentionality. Where do you get representative thought from? Like, how does this microphone that I'm speaking into right now, can that microphone be about anything? Or can the atoms that it's made of be about anything? Can this table, be about something? Well, obviously not. This notion of rational thought, of thought rather, it's something that doesn't square well with just physical items in the universe. Mental causation. Okay, again, I talked about how I can know certain things about my heritage as African American. I can't get that just from looking in the mirror. I would have to learn. Like, what is my skin color and place of origin? How does it relate to, African enslaved person? That's something that I had to pick up. But the thing is, I can't get there if all the thoughts in my brain really just kind of boil down to physical goings on, atoms bumping around, in my brain or whatever, because my thoughts aren't really relative to truth or anything about the world. My thoughts are produced by just stuff going on in my brain. Right. And then lastly, free will. I mean, if physical determinism is true, and if it is the case that we're not truly agents, if it is the case that we're not truly able to of different options in terms of what we can activate by ourselves, if we have no control over those things, then going back to my analogy about you being a husband to Tia, you really are not under any control of yourself if you actualize this notion of being a husband to somebody else's wife. You have no control over that. You can't pick. For example, you might go. I know your son wrestles, right? Let's say that if you don't have control over, who you activate in terms of being that role of father to, right? You might show up to wrestling practice and say, "Hey, son, it's time to take you home," and you put the wrong kid in your car, or something like that, and you don't have any control over it. So now you're kidnapping kids. You know what I'm saying? And there's nothing you can do about it because you don't have any control over. When you activate this or that role, you see what I'm saying? So all these different things go out of the window, if naturalism is true. Now I can be a lot quicker with premise too, but I just want to kind of pause there and just kind of see, if we're tracking, is kind of making sense or if we're good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tracking. I spent a lot of time in my work especially talking about intentionality and libertarian freedom, especially the libertarian freedom to think and to judge and evaluate what deliberation entails, and really, as I noted earlier, just to boil it down to make it as simple as possible. If the thing you refer to as I, does not possess the ability to judge a statement or an idea as either good or bad, because something or someone else has locked away, as it were, one of those options, then you don't stand in a position to rationally affirm that the only thing you could think is any good at all, let alone true. And so then if you can't rationally affirm, now, is that related to what you mean by rationally maintain?
Yeah, it is. Because what I'm saying is that, all these aspects of how the self are developed and how actualization happens and all that kind of stuff, I'm kind of lumping that under that word maintain, Okay. So to your point, I would classify that under, let me just jump back for a second. Remember, I was talking about self-verification there. When you think about this notion of thinking that something is good, but when we think about yourself, if you think that you're a good person or not, right, that's going to impact your behavior and so forth. But, how do you come to the conclusion that you're a good or bad person, right? You may have say you are driving down the street and you run some old lady off the road, like, hey, man, that's a terrible thing to do. I'm a terrible person, right? Or if you walk a lady across the street, at a street corner or something, you might say, oh, actually, I'm a good person. Well, either way, there's this evaluative process. You have to, be thinking about the old lady and what does it mean to help somebody? All these kind of things factor into, you coming into the conclusion of whether you're good or bad, but there's this moral dimension to it, that has everything to do with the rational processes that our self-concept hinges on.
Yeah. So that evaluative process, I mean, that comes down to, ultimately, am I, the thing I refer to as I, in charge, or is something else running the show?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so on naturalism, it seems to follow that something else is running the show, something that's not even a thinking thing in the first place.
It's running the show. Exactly. And so, the question is, I can be quick with premise 2, because I don't know if we want to get to questions or not, but I think it's pretty simple. I mean, the premise 2 is the self-concept can be rationally maintained. Just think about it. Are there things, well, let's just take a 2-step process. Are there things that are true about you? Is there a truth value to the meanings that you assign to yourself? Just in principle. Now, you may be wrong about what's true about you, but in principle, are there things that are true about you? Like, is it true or not that you are a husband to Tia? Is it true or not that you are an inhabitant of, you're a Nebraskan, things of that nature? Is there a truth value there? And then the second step is, if there is a truth value, do you have rational access to that, truth value? And I think that, most of us would say that we do. I mean, I think that we do think that the things that we believe about ourselves have some rational merit. So for example, let's say this, Tim. Let's say that you're an apologist, you're a Christian, and so forth. Let's say if you wake up tomorrow morning, you find yourself in prison, and you're being interrogated, and they're telling you that, no, actually, Tim, you're an Islamic terrorist. Would you be justified in saying, well, no, I'm Tim Stratton. I've got Freethinking Ministries, and like what would it take for them to convince you that you are indeed a Muslim terrorist? like how could they go about doing that? You see what I'm saying?
Right. They could show me video of me being an Islamic terrorist, and I would still not believe him, because I know that I am not an Islamic terrorist. I know I am a Christian who loves Jesus and believes that everybody is created equal in his image and ought to be treated in love. And so even if they showed me a video, then I would either say, well, that video has been doctored, that's Hollywood, or somebody possessed me, possessed my body, or created a clone or something. But I know me. There's things that I know about me that I don't care what anybody else says about me.
Yeah, unless you're the Winter Soldier, right? From Captain America, what I'm saying? Where you're doing all this.
Winter Soldier. Yeah. But I'd be totally justified in saying, no, I know who I am, and based on that video, that was not me.
Right. Exactly. And so, because at the end of the day, some aspects of our, or maybe all, of our self, in terms of what we think about ourselves, the meanings that we apply to ourselves, boil down to experiences. I'm saying I experienced this, and then I drew some conclusions in terms about myself from it, right? Or I was in this social situation, and I drew conclusions from it about who I am. Now, the thing of it is, with that being the case, really anybody who takes the scientific method to be veridical, to be something that yields truth, they should be inclined to think that our experiences that yield truth about ourselves is veridical as well, right? Because ultimately, the whole endeavor of science boils down to experience. You have experiments that are really just organized experience, and somebody experiences something and it yields truth about the world. Well, in the same way, our experiences yield truths about who we are. So if you think that experience in regard to the sciences are a valid means by which we gain information about the world, then certainly there's reason to think that experience is a good reason to think that we have a knowledge about ourselves. But also there, to be quick about it, I mean, also there's moral dimensions as well. Let's say that if you're in a courtroom and let's say you have a situation where there was a home invader, right? And you shot and killed him, and you had every idea in your mind, you believed it was just a criminal, somebody was coming in to get you, and it was dark or whatever. And then, at least your story is it was dark, and you turn on the light and it was actually a family member, right? And it was mistaken identity. You couldn't see him clearly. You thought it was, if you went to court and convinced the jury that you really believe that person was a robber, then, I don't think they would hold you morally accountable. If you had reasons to believe that person was, trying to rob you. However, if a video emerges and it turns out that the lights were right on, right, and you can see clearly that it was Uncle Joe, and you shot him anyway, you're going to jail. I mean, it's a wrap. You're definitely going to prison. Why? Because you based upon you should have known in that instance, who that person was, and there was no good reason to shoot him. You can't then say, well, I activated my protect the home role, saying against this person who was not an intruder, and I shot him dead. That's not going to work, because you should have known something about their identity, and that informed your moral decision there. And I could go further than that, but or I'll just give you this last one. If I say to somebody, I think that I'm Superman, and I say, I'm going to go jump off the Empire State Building, they're probably going to say that's a bad idea. I'm like, no, wait, but I read this comic book, and now I've got this impression that I'm Superman. I can do this. They probably would say, there's something wrong with you. We need to call the people with the jackets and get you locked up. And they would be right, because I have this self-concept that's irrational. And being in the mental health field, we refer to this all the time. There are actual disorders in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is like kind of the lexicon of the mental health field. All throughout there, you have these identity-related disorders. I mean, that's another line of reasoning for P2, is that we know what it's like for people to have irrational self-concepts. When that guy you meet on the street says that he's Jesus Christ, what I'm saying, he's probably headed to the psych ward. I mean, he's probably not. You know what I mean? Or if somebody says, if I walk up to the White House and say, I'm President Trump, let me in, I'm getting locked up. You know what I'm saying? Because there's something wrong with me. So we know something about what erroneous and irrational self-concepts look like. And so again, my whole point there is that we have good reason to believe that our self-concepts are rationally maintained in terms of how we see ourselves, being gleaned from experience, our interaction with the world outside of us. We have all sorts of reasons to affirm that we really do, know who we are and are functioning rationally in terms of how our identity concepts are working with ourselves and others. And if that's the case, then I would go back to the argument. If naturalism is true, the self-concept cannot be rationally maintained. But premise 2, the self-concept can be rationally maintained. Therefore, naturalism is false.
The SCAAN. I'm liking it, Adam.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And it seems to me that just some of the real world things that we're dealing with today, I mean, this might play a role in the real world, not just in the ivory towers of academia. I mean, it's common the big debate today is, can somebody who's born a biological male choose to, just because they have a self-concept that they're female, go compete in female track and win the state championship? Those kinds of things. I mean, so what do you think are some implications of this argument, and in what ways do you think it might be effective?
Well, there's a couple of different things, and actually, if you don't mind, I'm gonna just quickly go to like 2 more slides, and then I can kind of wrap that up. Right. But that kind of I should have left it up there. But one thing I hadn't anticipated when I started looking into this stuff is how deeply it's entrenched in our human experience and teleology, right? So I'm saying that naturalism is false, but what can account for this rational maintenance of our identity would be something like dualism, I think, right? And I think that I would take kind of the Victor Reppert route. I think I've got his book right here, as a matter of fact. C.S. Lewis's Dangerous Idea. I would take his approach. Yeah. He goes into what he calls explanatory dualism, and I think there's on theism. We have a reason, right, to think that we would have this, this coherent concept of identity. I mentioned earlier that I like to dig into African philosophers. There's actually a gentleman named Zara Yacob. And I mentioned him in the book that's coming out that I mentioned earlier with Urban Apologetics. But he's a 17th century Ethiopian philosopher raised in the Christian community, and employs the biblical text in his argumentation for God's existence. It's pretty fascinating. He actually makes a cosmological argument that's kind of strung together with an argument from reason. But one of the things he says in terms of understanding why we have this capacity for rationality, he says, God did not create me intelligent without a purpose. That is to look for him and grasp him and his wisdom in the path he has opened for me, and to worship him as long as I live. So he's getting into why, what could give us reason, or what would be the reason behind having these rational faculties. And he says, well, it serves a purpose. And for him, it has to do with being able to connect with the creator. Right. But then also further than that, we see in the scriptures, 1 John 1:3, fellowship is a big deal, to God. We were created to fellowship with one another. And so not only fellowshipping with God, but fellowshipping with each other. That's a part of that's right in there with human teleology. There's a reason why we have this capacity to know who we are, know who others are, and interact coherently. It's because it serves the purpose of allowing for relationships and real love to be the case, right? Or to be actualized, if you will. And then, just the great two commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. It's kind of an extension of that. If you can't have a right love walk, right? If the identity isn't right, if you don't have a concept of who you are, if I say I love this bottle of water or something like that, and I mean that in the same sense that I love my wife, and then something's wrong. I've wrong identified what that bottle of water is, if you will. And lastly, I've got a whole teaching on this on my channel, but in terms of what it means to be made in the image of God. But in a nutshell, what it means to be made in the image of God is much more than just having rational faculties or a sense of morality or whatever. It really has to do with God, with being God's representatives, and royal family on the earth, who are tasked with the collective project of stewarding the earth in a way that's consistent with God's nature and his will for creation. And in so much that it's a collective project, this concept of identity, being able to coherently function as a unit, and that being contingent upon identity, makes a whole lot of sense why God would give us the capacity to do so, given that we have this collective project that he has for us to fulfill. And so I think, if we're not doing that, I can stop now. Theologically, there's some implications there. But quite frankly, I didn't even start from that vantage point when I first started, messing with this argument here. Quite frankly, I was working on that article, Black Lives Don't Matter, that I put on Freethinking Ministries, where I talked about how if naturalism is true, then no lives matter. It really doesn't. And that kind of got me thinking along the same lines here, that just real quick, just to kind of sum it up, if let's think about the George Floyd situation, or any of these cases, if you have two different people looking at the news, I'll just take myself. When I look at the news, there are certain aspects of my self-concept that relate to George Floyd. We're both African American males, and we're both there's a lot of different directions I could go with that, but we connect ourselves to situations like those given our self-concept, and that informs how we respond to them. You see what I'm saying? But then also when it comes to morality, I'll just kind of use those two examples. So in terms of identity and morality, if naturalism can't account for either of them, then, for all these people who are atheists and believe that there's nothing beyond the natural world, you're not justified in your reactions morally or from a sentimental standpoint to these instances, because your worldview can't can't really justify the connections, moral or identity-wise, that you have with these incidents that we see going on. So you can't make coherent sense of the things that are going on today, I think, on a naturalistic paradigm. And that's really as my angling towards refuting what some people refer to as quote unquote black atheism. This is kind of along the lines of those arguments that I would employ there.
Yeah. So when you're saying, when you said, if Black Lives, or say that again about the title of your article, what was it?
Oh, Black Lives Don't Matter. Right. It's
so
I mean,
if naturalism is true,
nothing
matters in an objective sense, right?
Yeah, and I kind of said it, jokingly in the article. I said that if for a naturalist, they need to modify and say, well, Black lives matter to me, or Black lives subjectively matter in my opinion, or something like that. They need to change the hashtag, because the notion that Black lives objectively matter, meaning that we have that human beings have intrinsic, essential worth. That notion, I say, perishes, with the naturalistic paradigm, as does our self-concept or rational maintenance of our self-concept.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, yeah. Tell us about how you think this argument of yours might relate in the real world, in the streets, if you will.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think it's of service from an evangelistic standpoint. I think with apologetics, often we get caught up in the informational side of it, but there's the other aspect of kind of like in the vein of C.S. Lewis, or what's the gentleman I'm thinking about? I want to say Os Guinness, but that's not right. I'm sure it'll come back to me as soon as I get off of here. But basically, bringing apologetics. Was that?
Would it be Francis Schaeffer?
Schaeffer, yeah, thank you, Francis Schaeffer, right? So in kind of a Francis Schaefferian kind of a way, just kind of bringing apologetics down to the common man, bringing it down to everyday life. What I'm saying is that everybody's trying to make sense of the human experience, and what I'm trying to do with this argument is show in real time that the naturalistic account of identity, or the naturalistic account of the world rather, can't make sense of the identity facet of the human experience. Like we should expect really for our identity concepts to be all over the place, just kind of haphazardly being activated and applied, and all over the place, not consistent with what's actually going on in the real world, or the situations that we're in, or the groups that we're staying in relation to. We should just have this hodgepodge of constantly hectic and changing identity concepts. And again, so I'm trying, if we're trying to make sense of the world around you, again, like I talked about with so-called black atheism, I'm saying that, hey, if you're really upset about what you see going on TV, your worldview can't account for where you're coming from. And so let me show you a more excellent way, if you will. And I think this argument kind of helps to do that in a kind of a rubber meets the road kind of a way. Whereas I love the Kalam cosmological argument, I love the contingency argument. The contingency argument actually probably might be my favorite at this point. But in terms of like really getting down to the common man and helping them understand, like, hey, if you're trying to navigate this life, Christianity offers the best way to do that. The best worldview to do that. I feel like this argument kind of puts us in a position to make that case.
Yeah, it makes me think of the band Kansas from the 1970s. They did two songs that I love, that I grew up listening to. One was called "Dust in the Wind," and one of the lines, it's really seems to be written from an atheist or a naturalistic perspective. And one of the lines is, "All we do crumbles to the ground, though we refuse to see. Dust in the wind. All we are is dust in the wind." It's really depressing. It's true. Beautiful song. But then they do another song written through the lens of it seems to be theism, and with eternity in mind. And that one is called "Carry On, My Wayward Son." And one of the lines is, "Now your life is no longer empty, because surely heaven waits for you."
Wow. Wow. That's deep.
Yeah. I mean, they're a band of philosophers from the 70s, but, on naturalism, our lives really do seem to be dust in the wind. And that wind is causally determined, and that causally determines us as dust,
Right.
And things we think about, what we think of and about, and exactly how we think of and about things. And you've got no ability to think or act or believe otherwise on that view. And that really seems to just boil down to a meaningless life, an absurd life, really. But if God exists, and especially even if Christianity is true, man, we can be free thinkers who are created in the image of God.
Right.
And,
Right.
So many of the problems that we see in the streets today and in real life today would melt away if everybody would look at the world through that lens.
Well, yeah, and that kind of gets to some stuff we talked about earlier, man. I think you perceptively looked at the I guess moral accountability for the how we use our self-concept, if you will, or how because we do have some agency in it. You don't have to be just because the group that you associate yourself with hates another group. You have some agency in terms of whether you go along with that or not. You're not just like you said, wind or dust in the wind, rather. Just kind of mechanically having to line up with this group or what have you. So,
right.
Yeah.
That or not at the end is vital. You could go along with that or not. And if that's the case, then we are discussing not just libertarian freedom. It's more than source-ed freedom. It is alternative possibilities, libertarian freedom. So, our friend Phil Bear, he says to point out to non-believers that their personality is meaningless apart from the Christian worldview, and the gospel is a powerful evangelistic inducement. Actually,
that's interesting because, and I hadn't even looked at it till I saw his comment. But what's interesting about that is, in terms of the value that we place on our self-concept, like we value ourselves typically. But if everything that I believe about myself is just kind of cobbled together, or just random. It doesn't necessarily core with reality. It's just kind of thrown together by atoms or whatever. Then actually, yeah. What is that? I think that probably would lead me to value myself less. Wouldn't it? Because it's nothing it's nothing special about me. There's nothing significant about me. I'm just tossed together by physics and chemistry, right? That's very interesting. I'm about to make a note of that. Thanks, Phil Blair. I'm about to explore that a little bit further. But yeah, there is this connection between I'll just say significance and just a real coherent self. I think that's true. Yeah. That's it. Ben Kessler had a question too.
Since we're talking about Phil earlier in our conversation, I didn't have a chance to address it, but he says, Adam, your work blends beautifully with that of Francis Schaeffer, who you just brought up. And he says, what you call identity, he would call personality, which includes rationality. And he says, Schaeffer argued that the impersonal universe plus time plus chance cannot produce personality or identity. So, yeah, I think
that's interesting too. Yeah.
He says, Adam, your SCAAN argument is so important in evangelism, and you can express it in layman's terms without losing its potency. So, amen to that, Phil. I agree 100%.
Well, yeah. I know that Tim, you got those highbrow viewers, man. You got those theologically, philosophically inclined viewers. I didn't want to come, sounding crazy. I want to make sure that I had some rigor to how I presented it. But I do think that you can present this argument in a way that's pretty simple. You know what I'm saying? I think you really can. And I think it's very interesting. I'm about to make a note of this too. But Phil Blair mentions
Bear. Bear, like the.
Oh, Bear. I'm sorry, Phil Blair. Okay, I'm thinking like Ric Flair, Phil Blair. But okay, so Phil Blair. I apologize. But he mentions this eternal foundational self. That obviously we recognize to be God. But imagine if we had these self concepts that ultimately didn't have that landing place of like an ultimate self. You know what I'm saying? We have this. I guess you could have human to human interaction, but the notion that we have this eternal interaction of the self. You know what I'm saying? I think that's pretty powerful. That's pretty powerful, meaningful. I should say. Yeah.
Well, right on, man. Is there what are some last words you'd like to leave us with today?
Well, that's actually what I've got right now. Hopefully, I think we're coming back in a couple of weeks because I have a similar argument that gets into the issue of emotions. You know what I'm saying, and it'll kind of just add another building block along the same line. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. But hey, man, check me out on my Tru-ID channel. We got some new videos coming out. I'll probably be doing doing this right here, really exploring this further as I do more research and add to it and things like that. So you can expect more of that. But yeah, check me out on my YouTube channel. Tru-ID Apologetics Ministries is a nonprofit organization. So please support. It helps us to do what it is that we do, and we are trying to do some dynamic things in 2021. And hey, I just want to say thanks, man. Thanks for having me on, bro. I mean, again, just kind of being part of Freethinking Ministries. I've been able to fuse with what you bring to the table with the free thinking argument with what I do, and it's kind of given birth to this what I hope to be a doctoral dissertation for me. So I appreciate it, man.
Well, it just brings joy to my heart to see Freethinking Ministries and Tru-ID Ministries coming together.
Collide, not collide, but collaborate.
Collaborate, bring something awesome to the table together. So yeah, Adam, I'm just honored to count you as a friend and a brother, a colleague, and man, you sharpen me like iron. So thank you for all of that, and let's just continue to make some waves for God's glory. All right.
Amen, man. Appreciate you, brother.
All right. Well, hey, everybody, thanks for hanging with us today. Please share this with your friends. And Adam will be back on again soon to kind of give part 2 of what he's been working on. And so in the meantime, as I like to say, stay reasonable, and I'll see you soon. Bye.